vehicle-to-grid has been booming as a way to flexibly manage energy consumption on the grid. Raphael, V2G has rapidly found its place on the map to net zero. From a policy perspective, what has been driving its uptake?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Looking at it from a Brussels perspective, I do believe that, there's first the common understanding that we need to rapidly scale up renewable energy if we want to meet the decarbonization objectives. That's one aspect. But of course, the war in Ukraine is also another aspect that we need to take into consideration, like how do we quickly improve energy security of Europe? And so, that is the first aspect, but meeting those renewable energy targets means that we need to be able to implement that into the grid. And so while looking at that, how do we do it best and how do we provide flexibility to the grid to do it? And so they looked at the transport sector, and of course, EVs and battery electric vehicles basically provide that opportunity, that flexibility. And so it's in a way, the best of both worlds, as I like to say, because you're basically, decarbonizing the energy sector, and you're also helping the decarbonization of the transport sector, and the two are helping each other. So I think that there is this understanding in Brussels, that this is key. And so now what we're seeing is this has been discussed in many, many legislative files. We're seeing definitions, emerging. We're seeing some scope for the data exchange between the vehicles and the charging infrastructure kind of emerging, some baseline for the battery to be able to exchange that data, and some kind of framework, some kind of, not mandate, but incentives to deploy those vehicle-to-grid ready charging points. No mandate yet for different reasons, for several challenges, but those incentives are there. And I think that's key to actually deploy V2G, and that's one of the point that's pushing policymakers to look into it. And maybe one last point I would say, European-funded projects, sometimes we forget about them, but they do have a role to play in research and innovation, and they actually help feed the debate. So there are several of them, including Scale and Flow, just to name two of them. There's so many on the market. But those two projects are actually, giving knowledge to the policymakers and helping them understand that vehicle-to-grid is a possibility, and that, we should actually make sure that all legislations are compatible to that so that we can ramp up renewable energies and decarbonize the road transport.
I like there you painted a little bit of an image. You kind of brought in the fact that this isn't only one sector, it's transport, it's energy. And I like that picture of kind of this intersection. What role does V2G play in bringing together the energy sector, automotive industry, and technology providers?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, V2G is basically the crossroad of all those sectors. So basically what you're doing is making sure that through V2G, they can all communicate together, and that we can actually integrate renewables, make sure that vehicles can participate into the grid, because what we're seeing is basically vehicles are going to become battery. They're going to become, unit that feeds into the grid. And so V2G is, as I said, again, that crossroad. And now what we need is to make sure that all those sectors, energy, utility, transport, even the technology, the hardware, they all work together to create a system that works and, that communicates well together, because essentially it's all about communication for all those systems to be able to communicate all together. So what V2G does is bringing basically everyone to the table, being like, okay, how do we do it? And I think that's the stage where we're at right now, exchanging all together. And that's also what, again, European-funded projects are doing, bringing everybody together. How do we make it work?
It sounds like the value case is there, right? It's being adopted, but I mean, clearly there's still some challenges to its uptake. What do you think are these challenges, and how can they be overcome?
Several challenges. Some are just, regular challenges for regular people. So what should push citizens to move towards V2G? If there's no financial incentives, and if it's just too complicated, if it's too expensive, because right now what we're seeing, another challenge is that sometimes the charger is a bit expensive. So if there's no financial incentives to push people to switch to that, to change their behavior as well, because it's a behavioral change, at the end, we're not going to reach it. We're not going to be able to actually deploy those charging points at, mass market volume. So it's first that. The second aspect, I would say, is legislative one. So there's a lot of issue, and one of the biggest one is double taxation. So basically, the way we currently tax energy is based on flow, and this is this is a major issue. We're not gonna incentivize people to move towards V2G if they are taxed twice based on the technology that they are using to provide flexibility to the grid. So that's another major issue. And then the question, maybe a more technological question: are we moving toward AC or DC V2G? Those are questions that come back quite often. And the question of communication and protocols. We need to agree on, what language do these, sectors speak when, they are exchanging. So it's actually important, at least at the European level, that we have, protocols and standards in place that says, all right, this is the way the vehicle is going to communicate to the charging points, and this is how the charging point is going to communicate with the grid. If we do not have that in an open market like Europe, you're not going to be able to drive your vehicle from one country to the other and be able to use, that V2G and that flexibility in the grid. So I would say those are the major challenges. There are more. They are solvable. So that's a good point. But some challenges and hurdles ahead.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights, Raphaël.
Thank you so much for having me.
For more insights into the energy transition, make sure to join the Enlit community.